Today I'm going to talk about my top 10 coolest zombie movies. So this list is my personal favorite, and I'm sure there will be people that disagree with me. Before I go any further, I should say there are light spoilers here, but I'm not trying to give away too much. So this might seem like zombie sacrilege, but I'm not a big fan of two films actually. One of them is Day of the Dead, and the other is Return of the Living Dead. Day of the Dead is part of the George Romero cycle, and you know, I think people think of Day of the Dead as legendary as his first two films, but there's just something about it I don't really like, so it's not on this list. And if you really like it, sorry, but it's just a little too ridiculous, I think, and I just doesn't sit well with me. And Return of the Living Dead is sort of a knockoff of that series, and you know, I saw it when I was a teenager, and there's some important scenes, I think, especially the scene in the cemetery. Those that have seen it know what I'm talking about, but other than that, I think it's kind of subpar. So those films are not going to be here. I'm also not including any of the Evil Dead films. I know there are sort of some zombie-like creatures in those, but as far as I'm concerned, they're more demons than zombies. I've also steered clear of comedies like Shaun of the Dead or Warm Bodies, those kind of films. Just because I think, you know, this is Halloween, and I'm more concerned with the sort of horror, unsettling element of these movies. So, with that said, what is my criteria? I think zombie films should merge our nightmares with reality, I guess, and they should also have some kind of social commentary about the collective trying to destroy the individual. The best ones usually address that in some way. If they have some other commentary about consumerism or man meddling with nature or science or the dangers of the occult or voodoo, then that's great. And many of these films on this list have that. With that said, let's get started. At number 10, we have a film called Shockwaves from 1977, and it stars Peter Cushing and John Carradine, and it's directed by Ken Wiederhorn. An old Nazi sunken battalion rises from the sea as a death corps of begoggled zombies. Okay, so when I was a kid, this was a mythical film. I would see clips from it here and there, and my friends and I would often talk about it. It just seemed really inaccessible to us because we were so young. But I remember seeing images of the Nazi zombies, and there was just something very stimulating about that. The story is heavily inspired by the book The Morning of the Magicians. I read that book maybe 20 years ago, and it was unrelated to my viewing of this because I saw this actually many years before that, but I can see how the book did inspire this because there's a lot about Nazi occultism and them dealing with magic. So this film doesn't have that much gore compared to many of the films on this list, but it's very atmospheric. And you know, the Nazi thing has been copied many times in stuff like the film Overlord or Dead Snow or the video game Wolfenstein. In fact, there's a whole wiki page that's devoted to Nazi zombies, so if you want to look into more of this kind of thing, that's where you should go. All in all, I don't think it's an amazing film, but I do think that it has some very cinematic scenes of the zombies rising out of the swamp that are quite chilling, and I'm a huge Peter Cushing fan, so that made it appear at number 10 on this list. At number 9, we have a film called Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, and that is from 1974, and it's directed by Jorge Grau. I think I'm saying that correctly. And it's also known as The Living Dead at the Manchester Morgue and Don't Open the Window. It's a Spanish and Italian production, but it was set mostly in Manchester, England. I saw this film recently, and I really think it's quite successful, actually. It has a really unsettling mood, and the story is more of a mystery than some zombie films. Some of the scenes are quite graphic, so I warn you on that. And, you know, it's a little cheesy at times because it looks like some of the actors have been dubbed, which, you know, I don't really mind. The synopsis is that a cop does not realize that those responsible for several murders are the living dead. So many of the actors are Italian or Spanish, and their English probably isn't that good, so their voices have been dubbed. But many of the leads, I think, are actually speaking English. You know, it has similar sort of over-the-top quality like the spaghetti westerns have, or the Gaio horror films, but I think it's quite good, and what I do appreciate about it is it's kind of not well known. I'm a pretty big fan of horror, and I just heard about it a few years ago, so I think it's worth a try if you are into something that's a little bit more unexpected and underground. At number 8, we have The Omega Man, and this is from 1971. The director is Boris Sagal, starring Charlton Heston, Anthony Zerbe, and Rosalind Cash. So basically the story here is Charlton Heston has to develop an antidote to a virus that has destroyed humankind in a biological war and left infected humans as zombie-like creatures while trying to survive attacks by these creatures. It's a pretty simple story, but it's based off of a book by Richard Matheson called I Am Legend, and I highly, highly recommend this book. It's just a really profound work about man versus the individual, and I might actually do a video on it sometime because I think it's really, really important. So important that they've made 3 movies, I think, based off of it, and the first one was Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price, and I like that movie, but I don't like it enough to put it on this list. Omega Man, I think, is the best adaptation of the book, but not literal adaptation, but maybe the most successful film. The other one is Will Smith's I Am Legend, which I think is kind of terrible, actually. So the film, this isn't really apparent in the book, but in the film there's a lot of like Black Power analogies going on, and there was also one of the first on-screen interracial kisses in this film, which is very, you know, a lot of these things are of their time, so in some ways that part of it I think is aged well. but things that might have been considered serious back then have sort of an unintended campiness now. But the film has a lot of charm, and Charlton Heston is Charlton Heston. So the end deviates quite a bit from the book. Although I do like the end in the movie, you know, it's a little more Hollywood. The book, I think, the ending is more chilling, and it's a little more nihilistic, I guess. But as an allegory, the story is just perfect zombie consumerism, man against the collective story. So I highly recommend this one. At number 7, we have 28 Days Later, and that is directed by Danny Boyle, and it's from 2003. There's lots of star power in this film compared to many of the other ones on this list. So Danny Boyle directed it, and Alex Garland wrote it, and you probably know him from the film Ex Machina and Annihilation. And he also worked with Danny Boyle on The Beach and Sunshine. And the film stars Cillian Murphy, Brendan Gleeson, and Christopher Eccleston. I think that's how you say his name. And there's also a story that maybe Robert Carlyle from Trainspotting was supposed to make an appearance in this, but his schedule didn't allow for it, so he ended up in the sequel. And, you know, I think this film kind of redefined zombies for a modern audience. The first thing they did was speed up the zombies. They're real fast and sort of ferocious. They're not supposed to be zombies. They're just supposed to be people that have gotten this sort of rage virus. The thing that I really like about this film is that it feels like real life, especially in the age we're living in right now. So maybe if you want, take a look at it again. I definitely think it has a almost documentary type feel to it, and apparently I found this out in researching this video. It was inspired by a film I really love, which is The Day of the Triffids. I think that movie is amazing. So if you enjoy that movie and you haven't seen 28 Days Later, I highly recommend both of them. As far as the direction in this movie, I think it's quite restrained, and Danny Boyle is an excellent director, and he knows exactly what to do with this. If you've seen Trainspotting or any of his other films, you know that he is good at letting the material dictate the tone of the film, and I think in this case he's kind of hands off, and it does feel almost like a documentary. So in some ways I think that makes it scarier. At number 6, we have a Korean film called Train to Busan, and it's from 2016, and the director is Yeon Sang-ho. Sok-hoo and his daughter are on a train to Busan on the latter's birthday to see his wife. However, the journey turns into a nightmare when they are trapped amidst a zombie outbreak in South Korea. So I live in South Korea, so this film actually speaks to me quite a lot, especially because I've taken the KTX many times. KTX is the high-speed train that appears in the film. So the story is basically starts in Seoul and ends in Busan. That's not much of a spoiler. But you know, it's interesting for me to watch because I've actually been to many of the locations, and there's quite a large scene in the center of the film that takes place in Daejeon Station, which is the city that I live in. So it's very interesting to see that. Like The Train, this film is very fast-paced. It's sort of a high-octane zombie adventure, I would say. And it's it's good. The characters are endearing. You really root for them, and it sort of imagines the claustrophobia of like the house or the building that people are usually protecting. In this case, it's a train, and the zombies are in the train with the survivors. So it's kind of like, how do you fight them off on this train, which is quite innovative, I think. As far as other work that's related to this, there is a sequel, which I would skip if I were you. It's really nothing like the original film. I think maybe it relies too much on CGI, and it just doesn't have the same immediacy of the first film. There's also a prequel animation called Seoul Station, which is interesting, but I definitely think Train to Busan is the highlight of the series. So apparently they're going to make an American remake, and currently James Wan is attached as a producer. I kind of hope they don't do that. Usually these remakes that they make of Korean films are usually not that good, but I'll probably watch it if they make it. Anyway, I think this is probably the most action-packed of all the films in this list, but it really works. And if you're worried about the subtitles in this film, I wouldn't worry about it. The dialogue is really snappy and quick, and the story gets you so wrapped up in it that quite quickly you forget that you're even reading subtitles. So at number 5, we have I Walked with a Zombie, and this is from 1943. It's the oldest film on this list, and it's also, I think, maybe the outlier on here, primarily because it's a drama. So the story is this: a nurse in the Caribbean resorts to voodoo to cure her patient, even though she falls in love with the woman's husband. And it's definitely more of a drama, but it is quite atmospheric and chilling. It's directed by Jacques Tourneur, I think I'm saying that right, and it's produced by Val Lewton, who's sort of a legend in horror circles, and they were involved with the film Cat People, which is a classic. So this film, of all of the films on here, aside from maybe the number 1 slot, really deals with themes of slavery and racism, and the depiction of religious beliefs in Haiti concerning voodoo. And I feel like this one is much more than a horror movie. It's kind of like slow but methodical, and there's this sort of menace through the whole film. There are many haunting images throughout, and the black and white cinematography really makes the film sing. It's highly stylized, and it came out around the time of film noir, so there is that kind of element to it. Val Lewton said he wanted to make a West Indian version of Jane Eyre. That's supposedly what he said. And, I think there are definitely elements of that here, but it is a unique film, and it's not as much a, film about cannibalistic creatures attacking you. It's more psychological and a little unnerving. Anyway, I think it's probably one of the great films of that day. So aside from being a horror film, I would check it out just for that reason. At number 4, we have the Hammer Studios film Plague of the Zombies. And this is from 1966 from the UK, and it's directed by John Gilling. A medical professor and his daughter link a Cornish epidemic to a village squire's voodoo. To start with, I think one of the surprising things about this film is it came out 2 years prior to Night of the Living Dead. And obviously Night of the Living Dead is sort of seen as the quintessential zombie film that kind of started it all. but this actually came out before, and it is quite scary actually. And one thing I'll say about it is that the zombies are very iconic and quite scary looking. They're pre-Romero, but the way that Roy Ashton, the special effects makeup artist, the way he used contact lenses to show like sort of the possessed dead eyes and the kind of like caked on makeup, it really is effective. And I think it just makes this film a lot scarier than maybe it would have been in other hands. And it's one of the first Hammer films that kind of got away from the Dracula Frankenstein thing. In that case, it's kind of a anomaly. But if you're a fan of Hammer horror films, you're really gonna love it if you haven't seen it. And I think it's quite good for the time, and I definitely think it should be seen with more reverence, especially in tandem with Night of the Living Dead. But as far as I know, not many people have seen this, at least people that I know, so it's a little known gem. At number 3, we have a film called Zombie 2, and it actually has many titles. It also goes by just Zombie, Island of the Living Dead, Zombie Island, Zombie Flesh Eaters, and Voodoo. So this film is just crazy. And I definitely think it's the craziest zombie film that I've seen anyway. You know, there's a lot of other films that have a lot of gore and that kind of thing, but basically this film was released in 1979, and it's about a New York reporter who follows a woman to an island where a doctor faces an epidemic of the undead. And it's directed by the Italian legend Lucio Fulci. So there's a lot to say about this one. The first thing I should say is that this was kind of touted as an unofficial sequel to Dawn of the Dead, and it has really no relation to that film, but it came out shortly after that, and it is very different, so I wouldn't go into it thinking that it's going to be anything like that film, but it is crazy. And I guess this is a light spoiler, so if you don't want to hear it, you can skip ahead. There's a scene where a zombie fights a shark underwater, and it's a crazy scene. Apparently they filmed it in a large saltwater tank, and it's a real shark, and it was fed horse meat and sedatives before they filmed. So there's a certain kind of it looks quite real, and that's something I could say about a lot of this movie. And one reason I think it's, for me, one of the scarier films on this list, and it's primarily because some of the things almost look like a snuff film or something. They're really gory, and it just feels real somehow. And not in a documentary sense like 28 Days Later, but more like maybe they're trying to trick you by switching scenes of actual deaths with, you know, what's supposed to be a fake death. And I don't, you know, that's probably not true, but the makeup is very good and it's quite intense. And it was also, you know, it was banned in many countries because of its level of gore. If you like the Italian Gaio genre, like the films of Dario Argento, you'll definitely enjoy this. It really relies on the voodoo aspect, which I kind of like, which is similar to I Walk with a Zombie, but it definitely leans into the heroes against the mass of zombies by the end, and after it's over, you have this feeling that you saw kind of something you're not supposed to see, maybe. I'm pretty certain most horror fans are going to probably know what the top 2 films on this list are. They're really legendary when it comes to zombie films. So number 2 is Dawn of the Dead, and that came out in 1978, and it's the sequel to Night of the Living Dead, directed by George Romero. And the story is a horde of zombies swarm over the US, and some survivors in Pennsylvania enter a shopping mall to try to stop the zombies from getting them. Many films have copied this movie, including a remake by Zack Snyder, which I think is a good film, but I didn't include it on this list because I don't think it's just good enough. It has some good parts, and I think it's entertaining, but it's nowhere near as effective as this film. And you know, it just, this movie is like Zombie 2, is very over the top and pretty unsettling. I would say it's definitely more over the top than its predecessor, Night of the Living Dead. And you know, that's maybe a critique of the whole series for me, is as each movie got released, they sort of increased in cheesiness, I guess. Whereas the first one's very straight and like a social critique. This one is, you know, similar in that way, but there's definitely more camp going on, and it plays up a lot of the satire. Apparently, Dario Argento helped make this film get made. He's best known for Suspiria and Deep Red. So he offered to help Romero get financing for this film. Because of that, in the contract, Argento was able to cut the film for foreign audiences, foreign markets. So apparently there are several versions of this film floating around. And like I said, Zombie 2 was sort of released as a follow-up to this. But apparently in the USA, there was so much gore in this film that it was released unrated because they could only get an X if they rated it. So keep that in mind if you go into it and you're a little squeamish. The film was shot at Monroeville Mall, which is a real mall, and I guess Romero's friend owns it or something. And apparently that was quite a problem to deal with because they had to shoot at night because the mall was open during the day. And it was quite a juggling act of trying to get it all accomplished. Another thing to note from this film is Tom Savini, who is a special effects legend and sometime actor. And he's been in From Dusk Till Dawn and a few other movies. He actually makes a cameo in this film. He did the makeup, and apparently George Romero was just like, let him have free reign. And you can tell when a director lets someone do whatever they want, there's so much creative freedom that they end up doing their best work, and I think maybe that's the case here. Anyway, the film really inspired so many films after it, and there's not much else I can say about it that you probably haven't heard, but this is my number 2. And number 1 is probably what you expected, but I have a few things to say about it, so let's get on to number 1. At number 1, we have Night of the Living Dead, the classic. It was released in 1968, and it was directed by George Romero. And it stars Dwayne Jones and Judith O'Dea. And the story follows 7 people who are trapped in a rural farmhouse in western Pennsylvania. And they are assaulted by cannibalistic undead ghouls. Obviously, many things have been said about this film, and you can probably predict that it was going to be the number 1 on this list. But there are a few things I want to say about it. One thing I think is that I think it's a bit underrated as cinema. I mean, people think of it as a horror film mainly. But as far as independent films are concerned, I think it's probably one of the most successful of all time. And it definitely launched his career. And, you know, maybe something like a film like Reservoir Dogs or Taxi Driver or something where it just really cemented the auteur's vision. I think it does that. And obviously he's made several sequels to it, which I think kind of have descending quality. But one thing, this is another film that's heavily inspired by I Am Legend. So if you haven't read the book, I highly recommend checking it out. And it was made for less than $150,000, which is quite low. And, you know, people have talked about how it's an allegory for the turbulent 60s, which it definitely is. And the African-American lead was sort of a first, at least that I know of anyway. And I don't want to give away any spoilers about the end, but the ending really hits you kind of hard, I think. And it definitely has a lot of social implications. So this film really, really scared me when I saw it for the first time. If I recall correctly, there was maybe like a double feature late at night, and it was this film and Return of the Living Dead, which I don't think is a good film, but at the time it definitely scared me. And back then I was I think I was about 12 or 13, and I was living quite near a funeral home. Actually, there was our house, and then there was another house, and then the funeral home. And I used to have to get the bus to go to my school, and so the bus stop was on the other side of the funeral home. And I saw this movie late at night, and I had to get up early for school, and it was in the winter time, so the sun was not out, so it was quite dark when I had to go to school. And I remember for several months after watching this film, it was really difficult for me to go past this funeral home because it just terrified me so much. And, you know, maybe as an adult it wouldn't have scared me that much, but as a teenager I had seen nothing like it, and it really blew me away. And I think there's this kind of slow unfolding in the film that makes it even creepier. The scenes at the beginning with the heroine, really, you don't really know what's happening, and I think that makes it even more chilling, especially for me at that time, because I didn't really know much about the film, and you know, you heard about it kind of here and there, but I didn't really know how intense it would be. So it really caught me off guard, and I had bad dreams about it for a long time. And I think, you know, there's a bit of a fascination with the abomination with this film. It sort of unfolds, and you are kind of seeing it from his perspective, I guess, and what it would really be like if you were in a farmhouse with all these people, and trying to deal with them and all of their fears and insecurities, and there's a lot of paranoia, which I think the film The Thing takes a lot from, or is inspired by, from this film. And I think that actually elevates it past just mere horror. It becomes kind of almost like a play, because there are so few characters and they're sort of locked in this house. It really works in that way, and I think many films have been inspired by it, like Assault on Precinct 13 and The Thing. This sort of external horror trying to get inside and fighting it off. I mean, it's been done over and over again since this film. But I think it's a masterpiece, really. I don't think anything comes close to it. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Watch it with the lights off. And don't go by any funeral homes. That's all for today. Bye. Happy Halloween.